Okay, so question 5 is really just about quadratics, but it's quite a fiddly one in terms of sort of getting all the units correct, getting all the wording correct. So you do need to be careful with this type of question. So a company makes a particular type of children's toy, and then we've got a graph of profit, and profit is being measured in thousands of pounds against X, which is the selling price of the toy, and then we're also given the equation of that. So we can see from the diagram it looks like a quadratic. The equation for P confirms it is a quadratic, and it's been given to us in completed square form. So that means that if we need it, we've clearly got the vertex of the graph there. So what are we asked to do? So first thing is explain why £15 is not a sensible selling price for the toy. Now you need to be careful with questions like that. You have to show you're working. So if let's see what happens when the selling price is £15. So if I substitute, there's absolutely no reason to expand the brackets out to do this. So if I substitute 15 into that, I get a value of P of minus 125. Okay, now profit is in thousands of pounds, and that's actually minus 125,000, and they're quite strict. That's going to be your first mark. They're quite strict on the second mark, so there's a long list on the mark scheme of things they won't accept. So they won't accept things like they might make a loss, because they definitely will, there's no might about it. They also won't accept negative profit. That's not really a thing. So just before you're going to write your conclusion down, just think carefully, well, what would you mean by negative profit? You mean that they're going to make a loss. So why is that a bad idea for a selling price? Because the company would make a loss. It's not, so you know that's quite possibly what you meant, but if you wrote anything, if you put they won't make a profit, that's not okay, because that implies they might just break even. So you had to really use the word loss in there. Equally though, if you just put that into your calculator and never wrote down that value and just concluded they would make a loss, that's also not going to get you the mark. So you'd always need to show the calculation and make a correct conclusion. Okay, part B. So they want to make an annual profit of more than 80,000. So this is where it's very important that we use the fact that profit is in thousands, because when we come and use this equation, we're going to use P as 80. If you try and use P as 80,000, it's going to give you a crazy answer. Okay, so I mean, I actually don't need the vertex until part C, but I can see from that the vertex is at 100. So 80 on the p-axis would be about there. So if they set the selling price anywhere between those two values of X, then they're going to make a profit of more than £80,000. They want the least possible selling price. So when I get my two values of X, it would actually be that one. Because if you think about what's happening, basically we're saying, well, if they sell it any cheaper than that, they're just not selling it for enough to make that much of a profit. And I guess what's happening here is if they sell it for any more than this price, it becomes so expensive, people are just going to stop buying it. So they'll get less number of customers. So how are we going to solve that? Well, I'm going to solve it as an equation to start with. So when does the profit equal 80? Well, so when does the profit equal 80,000? And that's when P equals 80. So I could expand those brackets out, but actually it's going to be much easier if I just minus the 100. If I divide by the minus 6.25, just be really careful with the signs there, so they're both minuses. So that'll end up as a positive. And then if I square root, now do be really careful. We can see there should be two solutions. It's a quadratic, so we know there's potentially two solutions. So just make sure if you're doing it this way, when you square root, you consider positive or negative, and x therefore would be 9 plus or minus square root of 3.2, which if you work both of those out, in fact, yeah, let's get both of those. So if I do 9 plus root 3.2, I get 10.789. I'll go to 3 decimal places for now because that's going to be important for our final answer. And if I do 9 minus 3 root 2, I get 7.211. Okay, so we've already said it's the lower of these that we're interested in. We want the least possible selling it price. So if they sell it between either of those, they're going to make a profit of more than £80,000. So this is the one we're interested in, and you're possibly thinking at this point, well, that's what I did, but we've got to be careful with how we interpret that, because obviously that number rounds to £7.21. But if you round it down to £7.21, you're going to get a profit of slightly less than 80,000. So in the context of this question, we actually don't want to round it according to the rules of rounding. I need to think about what's actually going on, and they'll need to sell it at £7.22, and then they'll make a profit a little bit more than 80,000. But the original question said the least possible selling price for a profit of more than 80,000. Okay, and then the last bit of this question. Now, there's a bit of a clue in the wording of this one. If it says state, it implies that there really isn't anything you should have to calculate. So the answer is there for you. It's just up to you to interpret. So this is a quadratic. It's in completed square form. So its vertex is at 9, 100. Okay, so what is the maximum possible annual profit? Well, that's the y coordinate of the maximum. And I just need to be very careful. It's not £100, and do always include units if it's a real life problem. So that's in thousands of pounds, so that's 100,000. And when does that happen? It's when they sell it for £9. And do make sure any question like this, where there's 2 answers, you're very clear which is which.